Transverse earlobe piercings. Pros, cons, advantages, disadvantages. Coming up next on Pros and Cons by a Piercer, episode number 88. So you should stick around. For those that are new to the channel, my name is DaVo. I'm a professional body piercer and have been since 1994. I own and operate the Axiom Body Piercing Studio located here in Des Moines, Iowa, inside Skin Kitchen Tattoo. So when I talk to you about these things, I'm talking with a level of expertise that comes with being in the body piercing industry for well over 26 years. What's the piercing we're going to talk about today is a transverse earlobe piercing. It's a really long name for a kind of long piercing. For those who don't know what that is, here's a photo of sorts. Basically, it is a piercing that instead of going through the lobe, it goes horizontally through the lobe instead of going the traditional way. So it's kind of like the opposite. So maybe it's an opposite earlobe piercing. This was invented by Shannon Larratt, who was, I believe that's how you pronounce his last name. I don't remember how you pronounce it. It's been some years. He was the founder of BME. If you've not been there and you're interested in piercing and body modification, it is a website that I would really suggest checking out. Lots of great information on there. It's B as a boy, M as a Mary, Ezine, EZINE.com. Basically, it's kind of just like a Wikipedia situation of everything that has to do with body modifications. Anyway, he has been credited with creating this particular piercing in 1995. I don't know if it had been done before that, but it's pretty much a modern piercing. It's not anything that has any type of ancient, tribal, or anything like that connections. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 5 advantages, 5 disadvantages, 5 pros, 5 cons, starting with the pros, the advantages, the things we like about this particular piercing. Number 1, this is a very unique and rare piercing. It is not very common. In the 26 years of piercing that I've done, I've been involved in this. I've done maybe 4 of them, and it's probably been over a decade since I did the last one. It is not something that is often asked for, and it is not something that's often done. It's an unusual ear piercing, to say the least. Maybe one of the rarest of all of them. Number 2, this piercing just kind of fits into that anatomy. It doesn't distract from it. It just kind of enhances it. It kind of, when you look at the lobe, especially detached ones, it just kind of looks like it belongs there. Number 3, unlike many experimental or edge extreme piercings, this piercing has a long history of healing with little or no issue. It's not prone as much to having issues as other piercings that I would consider rare or unique. Number 4, most people that get this done claim that it hurts less than a normal ear piercing. I don't know if that's true because I don't have one. As far as my clients' experience, they seem to find the piercing rather uncomfortable. But like I said, most people most of the information that you'll find out there says that, there's not a lot of nerve impact and it doesn't hurt that much. Number 5, there's a large variety of different types of jewelry that you can wear in this particular style of piercing. Most common are straight barbells and curved barbells, but you could also wear rings. Of course, they have to be a large diameter ring. As far as you can get all kinds of different ends and designs and etc. So it gives you a lot of variety to work with. Now with the pros out of the way, I want to talk a little bit about the future of this particular series. Pros and cons by a piercer. I have pretty much exhausted a majority of the piercings that I can do this on. So starting next week, we're going to start season 2, and we're going to start going back through some of the piercings that I did roughly about 2 years ago because of 2 things. I've updated the format and how I do these. I think they're better now. They're more informative. And also because the production level that we have now is much better, and some of the information in the older videos is a little dated. So starting next week, we will start this whole thing over again, and stay tuned, because you might learn something new even if you've seen the old videos. So watch for them. So now let's move on to the cons, the disadvantages, the things that we do not like about this particular piercing or may cause issues. Number one, this piercing has to be done much slower than other piercings. Usually this piercing is not a quick one push. It's more of a gentle, longer push, mainly because you're trying to make sure that that piercing stays centered all the way through. Sometimes you can do a little bit faster. It depends on the amount of space that you're going through and how wide that lobe is. Number two, this piercing takes much longer to heal than other ear piercings. Average healing time on this one is anywhere from 6 months to a year. And the reason for that is because it's such a long piercing. Longer the piercing, the more healing needed. Number three, this does have a risk of migration and rejection, especially if it's not done correctly. It does have a failure rate. It's always a possibility. Mistakes happen. That's life. Your body doesn't tolerate it, and your body says no. And it has more of an ability, because it's not so as deep as other piercings. There's not as much restriction, so it's more prone, if it gets caught or damaged, trauma, to migrate out of the body. Number four, this has a risk of abscesses developing for one reason or another, or bumps. Part of this has to do with the location, and part of it has to do with the angle the piercing's at, and a lot of other things. Generally, some of this can be avoided by having flat disc ends opposed to rounded ones. At least that's the theory, but this piercing is prone to that problem. Number five, if you take the jewelry out, this piercing will close fairly rapidly. Like any long piercing, no matter what part of the body it's in, if you take the jewelry out, it's easier for your body to squeeze that hole shut and start closing it. So it's really one of those piercings that you do need to leave something in it at all times. Next up, let's talk about some of the things you should look for when trying to go out and get this piercing. The first thing is you should find a piercer that has a fairly good amount of experience doing this particular piercing. It is not a common piercing. It's not unusual to come across somebody that's been in the industry for maybe as much as 30 years that's just never done one. So you really want to find somebody that maybe has a little bit of experience on this one, and it is not a bad idea to travel to get somebody that's done 20 or 30 of them, opposed to going to your local guy who maybe has done one. No matter how good he is, it has to do with experience. Second thing is they should be doing this piercing freehand. They should not be using any type of forceps or clamps. It needs to be done manually, basically. As far as jewelry on this one, if it's an attached lobe, generally the best option is a curved barbell. If your lobe's unattached, then your best option is either a barbell, standard, straight, good old-fashioned barbell, or a Lobe stud. Either or is your best option, and they should talk to you about it. If they start pulling out rings, I wouldn't advise getting that piercing. You might be able to wear a ring in it after it heals, but it's going to have to be pretty much a very large diameter. Same thing with any other type of circular jewelry. But the jewelry shape needs to match your anatomy. Your piercer should discuss with you the risks of rejection and abscesses before you get this done. They should also discuss with you any future plans you may have for other piercings in that area. Because of the location of this piercing, it can impede your ability to do things like additional ear piercings or earlobe piercings, and also stretching your ears. So you really want to talk to them about any future plans you may have. Now let's talk a little bit more about the piercing experience itself. When they go ahead to mark it, they should mark an exit, an entrance, in a line that shows you the angle of that particular piercing and what angle they're going to go at. This should not be a piercing that they don't mark. It's very important they do that and then show you so you know where it's going to be. Usually with this one, I will get out the old caliper and measure while I'm marking, or I will take a stick, like off of a cotton tip applicator, and mark off the distance of the jewelry to make sure that it's going to fit comfortably inside there with a little bit of play. As I mentioned before, this piercing is done much slower than other piercings. With this one, our concern is not so much quick and painless as much as steady, consistent, and straight. And it is not an easy thing to do when you consider how thin sometimes the lobe is. Of course, if you have fatter lobes, it's going to be a little bit easier for your piercer to do it, but not everybody does. And that tissue can kind of separate on you. So it has to be kind of a little bit slower than other piercings. This may be done with either a curved bar or curved needle or a bent needle. Some piercers will customize how they shape the needle for this particular piercing. There's a lot of debate over which works better and doesn't work better. Personally, I've found that you have better control with straight needles. That's me. It's how I pierce. The curved needles seem awkward and strange to me, and I've never been happy with the results. But if the person's used to using that, that might be the best option for you, especially with attached lobes where you're going to be using a curved barbell. Having something kind of piercing that kind of matches the shape of the jewelry may be in your advantage, or maybe your advantage. I know I'm saying that weird, but it sounds right. Or it doesn't sound right, I'm just saying it weird. Depending on the shape of your lobe, what your piercer will probably do is pinch down on the lobe with their thumb and possibly their forefinger and possibly their index finger, and then pierce through that area. They have to do this to support the tissue, because if you just put pressure on one side, it's going to cause that tissue to roll and kind of be weird. And yeah, it's not uncommon to do this one that way. It's the only way I've ever found out how to do it. Usually a needle receiving tube or a cork is used at the end just to make sure that we don't hit anything else. Especially with attached ones, because you're often piercing into or down towards the face. Now let's talk about healing. Like I said earlier, average healing time on this one can be anywhere from 6 months to a year. It's going to take a lot longer than other ear piercings to heal. You should be ready for that from the beginning and prepared for that. Now, basically, as far as care on this, I would suggest cleaning it twice a day with sterile saline solution. I like Nelmed, piercing aftercare, or wound wash. Twice daily, and then either wiping it clean with a sterile piece of gauze sponge or a clean paper towel, or rinsing under running water. Also, you should practice cross-contamination prevention. Common sense things like washing your hands before you handle the area. No oral contact or exchanging of bodily fluids on or around the piercing. Keeping your environment clean, clothing, bedding, towels. Not submerging the piercing in bodies of water you cannot control the quality of, which is everything but your own clean bathtub. That means no swimming. No swimming. Because I get asked that on every single video I ever do. Also, you want to avoid contact with telephones, headphones, earbuds, anything that may come in contact with the area. For the whole healing process. The masks with the loops, you do want to make sure you're changing them on a regular basis, basically because they can hold contaminants. So do clean them and change them often. Anything that's in the area, bacteria and etc. travel. So it's always possible that even though that thing may be sitting down here, it could travel up into your lobe. The other thing is making sure that you isolate the piercing. This piercing, like any piercing, especially ear piercings, are really, really prone to this. Does not like contact. You want to avoid playing with the piercing, touching the piercing, letting other people touch the piercing, and also avoiding contact and pressure or anything that may be traumatic. Common reactions to the trauma of the piercing usually last anywhere from 3 to 5 days. During that time, you're going to see redness, discolorization, possibly some heat. You're also going to see inflammation, swelling. You might see a little bit of slight bleeding off and on. Pain-wise, you may have a little bit of throbbing or aching pain immediately after the piercing is done. Usually varies from person to person. Usually it only lasts about 10 or 15 minutes, sometimes a little bit longer. After that, it'll be tender to the touch. If you bump it, you're going to know it kind of situation. And sometimes that can last up to about a couple weeks. It's not really something you want to be concerned about. Like anything, if you keep touching it and it hurts when you touch it, don't touch it. That's simple. Lastly, on healing, you should monitor the piercing daily for 3 things. First off, to check the balls, make sure they're on tight. The next thing would be to keep an eye on it to make sure there are no abscess, bumps, or anything else is forming, and that there isn't any movement, migration, or rejection on either side. And next up's living with the piercing. The jewelry, first off, should be left in at all times until it is completely healed. Then at that point in time, you can take it out and replace another piece. However, you do want to pretty much leave something in it indefinitely. Like I stated earlier, they can close pretty rapidly, so it's a good idea just to leave the jewelry in. I also mentioned earlier that you should discuss with your piercer and consider beforehand any additional earwork or piercings you want to get in the area. Putting any additional trauma or stress on that piercing can cause a healed piercing to suddenly act up. This is especially true if you have like a lobe piercing above it and you start stretching it. You're basically pressing down on that piercing and it can cause it to migrate. There also may not be space in there to safely do additional piercings. So this is things you should plan out ahead, unless you just plan on having just the translobe piercing on that side, or transverse lobe piercing. Transverse lobe. I always say trans. I don't know. It's complicated. It's a complicated name. I would have called it something else. I don't know. A George. Lastly, abandoning the piercing. Any piercing, especially like this, if you take the jewelry out, it's probably going to close fairly rapidly. You'll be left with indentation scars on both sides. Usually those will fade over time. Sometimes it shouldn't be overly noticeable. It should be just like the piercing holes look like they're empty. Well, that's all I have to say on this particular subject, the transverse earlobe piercing. This was requested quite a few times, so I hope I covered everything. If you found this informative or useful, please give me a thumbs up. Let me know that you liked it, because we like it when you like it. If you have any further questions or you have something to add, or if you have one of these and you'd like to share your experience, please comment below. That's what the comment section's for. And I usually answer them if I have time. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Hit that notification bell so that you're notified every single time we post something. Also, check out our merch store. Link is in the description. Lots of things from hoodies and t-shirts to fanny packs and phone cases. About a dozen different designs, whatever color you want. Till next time, here's hoping all your piercings heal with ease and without a single issue. And if you're in the Des Moines, Iowa area, I hope to see you for your body piercing needs in the future. Have a good day, everybody. Take care of yourself and take care of everybody else, because you know it's part of your job.